Okay, so chapter 7 was called Ethical and Legal Issues in U.S. Education, with the first part called Education and the Law. So the book says you must do what is legally right and you must do the right thing. So when it comes to ethics, the book provided some excellent situations for us to consider. And then it provided the characteristics of a good ethical decision. So looking at some of those questions, the first one was, should the sponsor of the high school literary magazine refuse to print a well-written story by a budding writer if the piece appears to satirize a teacher and a student? And so I did a little research, and that's when it comes to free speech. In an educational setting, the right to free speech is implemented in ways that do not interfere with the school's educational mission. So the fact that a student is involved, if the school's mission is to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for students, that immediately goes out the window anytime somebody is pointed out in a way that might paint them in a negative picture. So and I feel like it also would contradict, some of the studies that schools are doing on character and empathy, and it totally is moving away from that when you have a student trying to I don't know what the motives might be, humiliate or ostracize a teacher and a student. So I feel like that would not be a good situation. The other situation was, is a reading teacher justified in trying to increase achievement for an entire class by separating two disruptive students and placing one in a reading group beneath his level? And there's no evidence to support placing one student in a reading group beneath their level. I mean, none to my knowledge. So that would be better. That situation would be better handled if the teacher would maybe, try to pick up some new classroom management skills and really focus on minimizing the disruptive behavior in these students, and maybe kind of get to the bottom of it and not necessarily punish them. And then finally, the third question was, should a chemistry teacher punish a student on the basis of circumstantial inconclusive evidence for a laboratory explosion if the example of decisive, swift punishment will likely prevent the reoccurrence of a similar event and thereby ensure the safety of all students? This is definitely not the right move. I feel like it is, these questions, in my opinion, they're kind of right or wrong, with the exception of the reading level one. That's kind of more of an ethical one. But this one, it clearly violates the student's right to due process. If the teacher and administration isn't able to pinpoint exactly who caused the explosion, we need to look at the other factors. Maybe the students just simply don't know how to do the experiments, and or maybe they don't have good laboratory safety skills, and so time would be better focused on trying to work on some of that and develop these skills in students, as opposed to punishing one for something that they may or may not have caused, and it might have been due to the fact that they don't know what they're doing. So that would be a better use of time. And so there are certain rights that teachers have, legal rights. This includes the right to due process also. So due process, the careful step-by-step examination of the charges brought against a teacher. And I really wonder how much this is actually experienced by teachers, because public opinion, and if you notice a lot of stories that hit the news, I mean, even if a teacher has simply been charged with anything involving like being inappropriate with a student, I mean, they almost always, you know, lose their job or are kind of disciplined before anything is formal. Because, and I understand school districts don't want that kind of negative attention surrounding their district, and you know, they want to avoid the appearance that they're hiring the kinds of teachers that would do those kinds of things. So, but I wonder, you know, if due process, how much of it is really experienced by teachers. They also have the right to non-discrimination, and an interesting discussion about tenure I read was about tenure. I see the advantages and disadvantages of it. I feel like teachers, you know, it's advantageous for the teachers because, you know, they have some kind of sense of job security. But I see that the disadvantage would be if there's like a teacher that might really need to get moved out of there. It might be a slower process, and you know, depending on how urgent the issue is, it can be difficult to have them removed. And of course, we have the right to our teaching contracts, and you know, that discuss the components of a contract: offer and acceptance, competent parties, consideration, legal subject matter, and proper form. And we also have the right to academic freedom. So the book also talked about the rights of students and teachers, student teachers, I mean, I guess it depends on the district, but I'm almost positive that the district that would be student teaching at would offer me a limited amount of protection under the law. You know, I feel like it's pretty standard, and I feel like it's pretty fair, you know, that for there to be conditions, because it's kind of like a trial run when you're student teaching, and you know, we can't expect them to go out of their way necessarily. I mean, you should be safe within the building, but you yourself, I mean, have to be held to a strict standard as a student teacher. I mean, just like visitors and anyone else who's not employed by the school district. So the book also discussed tort liability law. It's where an individual who is negligent and at fault in the exercise of his or her legal duty may be required to pay monetary damages to an injured party. And there are many accidents that teachers cannot reasonably foresee that do result in student injuries. There was one situation with my daughter at the beginning of the school year. She's in kindergarten, and another student cut her with scissors on the finger. It was very small, but it was handled very seriously. The other student was suspended, and I mean, these are 5-year-old kids. I know many of them did not attend preschool, and so this is maybe the first time they're learning how to cut, and I feel like they should learn how to cut in kindergarten. I don't feel like we can take away scissors. I feel like it's part of life to learn how to use scissors safely. And I feel like in this situation, just like in Fagan v. Sumner's 1972, the time was so short that the teacher had no opportunity to prevent injury, and it cannot be said that the negligence of the teacher is a proximate cause of the injury. And I feel like that's safe to say in this situation. She had instructed the students on how to properly use scissors, and she was attentive to them using them. And still, a student maybe new to the use of scissors wanted to know what they would cut, and he cut my daughter just very slightly on the finger, and thank God it wasn't serious. And so, but I saw how it was handled very seriously, and the teacher definitely wanted to avoid any appearance of negligence, and so that's how that was handled. So the book also talked about educational malpractice, and I see how the school grading systems and teacher evaluations are kind of also placed in an effort to avoid this kind of thing. There's more accountability now probably than ever before as to what's being taught, and just making sure that students are growing and excelling. And if they're not, then immediately it's the teacher and the school. There's something not quite working there. So there's also we're legally required to report child abuse. The book listed all the possible characteristics of child abuse. We are limited to photocopying, videotaping, and then the book brought up social media use, and I thought this was really interesting. Probably in the last maybe 10 years, with the rise of social media, this has become a real issue. It's pretty obvious that we shouldn't, get on Facebook or anything like that, during instructional time. But I wonder if, I've seen certain teachers who have personal Instagram accounts who post pictures of their students on these accounts, and it always kind of feels weird. I don't know if they should do that. I don't know if they're asking parents to sign a photo release, or if it's a district thing, or how that's handled. But I've never quite felt comfortable with it, because I feel like these personal Instagram accounts can be accessed by anybody, and it's not necessarily something that a parent would consent to. But maybe they would. I don't know. I've not been approached with that. And it would appear that as frequently as it happens, that maybe some teachers are just doing it without permission, which is even worse. So, and then the book talked about the legal rights of students and parents. They have the freedom of expression, due process as well. There's a 2-pronged test for search and seizure involving students. School officials must have a reasonable suspicion, and the search must be done using methods that are reasonable and appropriate given the nature of the infraction. And under the Buckley Amendment, students have the right to examine their school records, and schools may not discriminate against students on the basis of race, sex, religion, disability, etc. And then there are certain legal rights of school districts. In some cases, which is crazy to me, schools can use corporal punishment if it meets criteria that have emerged from other court cases involving corporal punishment. And they can be held responsible if they fail to act on reports of sexual harassment of students by their peers or professional staff. And there's certain religious activities that are allowed at school, and those are outlined by the U.S. Department of Education.